Welcome to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen, where we help you navigate the challenges of feeding your family and learn about the role food plays in our health and relationships. Feeding and food relationships can be stressful, confusing, and even destructive. I'm Kristen Saxena, a pediatrician and mother of 4 who's been researching and sharing what I've learned about feeding for over 10 years. In this podcast, I'll share my experience and expertise to help our kids and ourselves with everyday survival tips for real parents. This podcast is about progress, not perfection. So let's get started. Welcome back to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen. I'm your host, Kristen Saxena. If you're enjoying our episodes, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We come out with new episodes every week. I'm very excited about today's episode. This one is for the adults, the parents, and how important it is to take care of ourselves. We're going to be talking a little bit about the difference between a diet and what is a true sustainable lifestyle change, and the importance of making sure we're focusing on those lifestyle changes. We're also going to talk about mindfulness and meditation, as well as mental health and exercise. We're going to be joined by our guest today, Dr. Molly Lupo. She is a nurse practitioner who integrates lifestyle medicine and health and wellness coaching into her practice. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited. So I actually met you kind of through a mutual friend.
Yes.
But when we started chatting, I felt like we could be
Kindred
fast friends.
spirits.
Yes. So yes. I'm so excited to have met you. So you're a nurse practitioner.
Correct.
But you have gotten into health and wellness coaching, nutrition coaching, and kind of lifestyle medicine. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you kind of guide us through your journey of how you got here?
Yes. Do you want the short version?
You tell me.
Okay. So
I ain't going nowhere.
So my background is actually in oncology. And I worked in oncology for like 10, 12 years. After I graduated with my master's, I went down to Houston and did a fellowship at MD Anderson. And I really loved oncology, but like every single patient who was coming through our door kept asking us like, well, now I have been like struck with this like life-threatening diagnosis. How can I be healthy? Mm-hmm. And we were like, well, you should eat well and you should exercise, but we have to see 1 million patients, so we'll see you next week. Go do those things, And so, I mean, and it's just the way the system's built, right? Like, This is how it is. So, but sort of slowly over time, I got into like nutrition and like what really drives people. I'm very curious about like behavior change. So I love like learning about that. And then just sort of through my journey and path, I ended up opening my own practice last October where, we call it Lupo Preventative Medicine. And the reason being is like, I want people to know the things that they need to do, but I also want to partner with them in a way where it feels doable for them to actually go out and do the thing. So like instead of, just saying like, oh, American College of Sports Medicine recommends 150 minutes of exercise every week. Like you have to know where they're at right now. If they're at 0 minutes, you don't start with 150, you know? So it's just, to me, it's just so important to partner with them and to ask them like, what is it that you think you can actually do? And then to go from there.
So I have to admit, so like lifestyle medicine is kind of like the category that all of this falls into, right? And I mean, I went to medical school and residency, and I don't really remember this as like a distinct category.
Yeah, it's not. So
I'm like, I'm a doctor. What is this?
Yeah, I don't know how old American College of Lifestyle Medicine is, but like that was sort of my first, I think, like taste of like, oh yeah, of course, like this is totally what I want, because their pillars of lifestyle medicine are nutrition, sleep, exercise, stress management, avoiding risky substances, and then like social connections. And
like
so,
all the things that would keep you from needing, hopefully, like most of the specialists.
Yeah. And what I find is like, one, like we have a lot of room to go from where we currently are at, in America versus like all the things that we could do before we put someone on a medication. So, like I have one patient who she came to me and her A1C was like 6.5. So she was like diabetic or whatever.
Yeah.
And all we did was focus on fruits, vegetables, protein targets, movement, and some mindfulness techniques. And she lost like 30 pounds in 5 months. And her A1C went down to like 5.7, which, is still not quite where I want it, but.
Well, but it's going the right direction.
Correct.
With no medication.
With no medications.
So, I mean, I think that just like brought a lot of stuff to mind, because I think that as in medicine, so as doctors, nurse practitioners in large, I think the training is find problem, fix problem.
Yeah.
Not so much. I mean, we get some training and we kind of give lip service to the prevention of problems. But even that is usually like, I will prevent you from having worse problems by putting you on XYZ medication, right? And I just don't think that in general, like traditional medical practices, unfortunately, are set up to do the kind of lifestyle medicine or prevention that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So can you kind of guide us through, obviously you saw this.
Yeah.
So in what ways then have you changed your practice or sort of the structure of your visits to accommodate this?
Yeah. So, and I'm sure that you experience this as a pediatrician, but like you would churn through like 20, 25 patients a day. Mm-hmm. So if you do the math, like you don't get a lot of time to sit with them. And so I guess that's one of the things that has really like shifted in my own practice, is that like all of my new patients get an hour and a half. All of my follow-ups get anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is because I want them to feel seen and heard. I don't want them to feel dismissed. I don't want that experience of the 10-minute visit that's like in and out. Are you doing okay? Okay, great. I'll see you in 3 months. I want them to feel like really like nurtured and taken care of. And so, for me, that, I guess, I mean, certainly I could, stack the schedule, but I just don't want to.
Yeah.
It's like not what brings meaning to me. Totally.
Well, and I totally understood that too, because actually as I feel like I was late to the party of learning what lifestyle medicine was. It's kind of like this little best kept secret, I feel like, because it's been out there as I got into it. I'm like, this isn't new, but it's not mainstream maybe, but getting more attention.
Yeah.
Rightly
I feel like
so.
it's what people want. Yeah. It's just a matter of, and insurance is like, it is what it is, but it kind of dictates the care that you give. And then when you get in a big system, you just turn people through as fast as
you
can.
don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of clinicians, I guess. I mean, I want to bring that point up too, is it's like, I don't blame people in medicine, because I think this is the system.
Yes, exactly.
And there, a lot of it is a little bit powerless to it, because as I looked at lifestyle medicine, I was kind of like, well, that's sort of the heart of pediatrics. I mean, again, it doesn't always play out exactly that way, but we're talking about preventative medicine. We talk about basic things like, eating and sleeping and all those things. And I do think as you age through the system, you move away from that a little bit. But even then, like, I was fortunate enough, like in my practice, I did have some leeway to, say I would like to have longer appointments with new patients and follow-ups, but certainly it was at a cost to me. Yeah. They're like, that's fine, but you will make less money. Yeah. So that's a choice that people are making for their families. And that's even being in a system where you were given that choice. And I know for a fact that a lot of places it's like, well, if you aren't seeing the 25 plus patients a day, maybe this isn't for you. Yeah. And so I think that it's cool people, that you can create this new system.
And I tell people all the time, it's like, well, it's not really like any fault of any provider out there. Like, they got into it for the same reasons that any of us got into, and that was to help people. But we didn't know what the system really looked like until we were in it,
Totally.
And so, for a lot of people, they sort of feel like their hands are tied, or, things are strung to RVUs or whatever it is. And I'm still sort of building my practice, so I'm not exactly sure what this will look like. But, like, to me, it's just so important to be able to deliver, like, meaningful care where people feel taken care of. And if that means that I make less money, but, the bills still get paid, then I don't really care about
Right.
the rest of it.
Because I totally understand, because I think, like you said, this is the heart of why most people go into it.
Yeah.
And I think why there's a lot of burnout, because you start to
Yes.
feel like you're churning through and you're not really getting
There's no
from
like
it what you wanted
processing
to.
of
and,
anything that
yeah.
like happened that day. Like I worked when I worked in oncology, I had started sort of this, what do we call it? Like mindfulness and medicine, I think.
Yeah.
So we had like this every other week group where we would sit and like process through the really tough cases that happen, but like no one is like sitting down and doing that. And like people would cry and it would be like very emotional, because we are still human beings, like at the core of it,
Well, I think that's a point too, is that like the survival mechanisms that you need going through a career in medicine is I feel like I was sort of late to the party again. I'm late to a lot of parties. I'm actually a very punctual person. These are all pretend parties.
Pretend parties.
But I'm starting to realize maybe I'm late to a lot of things. But I feel like only now and I'm still working on this. And so I want to talk to you about this a lot. Mindfulness. I actually felt like part of the reason that maybe a lot of people in medicine have difficulty with that is part of the survival is this sort of separation that you have to do to kind of psychologically and emotionally survive when you're going through, what are really traumatic scenarios with patients and families and things like that. And so I actually got to the place where I was like, I feel like I'm a little bit like cold and dead inside, because you have to be with these people through these horrible situations, and then you have to move into the next room and just take care of the next guy. And
pretend like that traumatic event didn't just happen.
Exactly. Like we weren't in a code next door.
Yeah.
I'll go get, your ice that you needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whatever. So, so you have kind of like the 4 M's with Molly, right?
Yes.
So you want to walk us through the 4 M's?
Yes.
I think that's a good place to start.
So the 4 M's was kind of born out of my own sort of framework that I was like done with like diets. I was just like done with like everything, but it was really like pushing or like digging into like, what is it that actually like makes me feel good every day? Because it's not some magic number on the scale that happens one day. Like everyone thinks that like their life's going to be magically different. They're not going to have hardships, all the things. But they're all still going to be there. And so what I sort of discovered was the first M is macros, or like macronutrients. So, and you don't have to like go all in, but like, focusing on whole foods of protein, fiber, fruits and vegetables at every meal, and then sort of like picking and choosing when you really wanted to have like the thing that you really enjoy or love. Like I'm a dessert person. Like I could pass on the red wine all day, but like I would like my dessert. So, using things like mindfulness where you really slow down and you use your senses to like really taste the food and, be there and really be present with it versus just like mindlessly eating, that changes your experience. And then meditation was born out of that because it was like sort of this daily practice that I started cultivating. And it was like, oh, when I do this helps me when I get into those like stressful moments of like triggers or whatever, to slow down and see like, okay, what are my thoughts? And then actually questioning those thoughts. Like, are they actually true? Most of the time they're not true. And so, sort of using meditation as a tool of like groundedness every day. And then the 4th M is movement. And that's like, I need to move my body every day. Like I'm just like more naturally like an anxious person. So part of like dispelling that energy is like moving. And whether it's like a walk or being on my bike or running, like I don't care what it is, but like that helps me feel better throughout the day. So those are the 4 M's very briefly.
Well, I love it because you work mostly with moms, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I feel like, and I've talked about this actually in another podcast, but a lot of times like earlier in life, I feel like I was always looking for this like secret recipe. Like, this is the perfect diet. This is the perfect exercise regimen. This is all the things I need to do. And then kind of like you said, like then life will be perfect, right?
Yeah.
And so, and also I had my cousin on who had bariatric surgery and she went through binge eating, and she kind of talked about the same thing. It was like always, if I got to this perfect number on the scale, then life would be great. Well, it turns out if you didn't actually address like all of the issues that you were having that were just kind of culminating in some of these behaviors, things don't really change that much, no matter what the number on the scale is or whatever. So I kind of love the idea, and I think that's true in a lot of things in life anymore. As I look at it, it's actually just like the simple things are true. And so I think kind of like you said, just sort of like this general idea about nutrition rather than here's the diet and the calories. And I do want to go more into that, because I think with macros, you can go one way or the other, because there are ways to like really fall into that. And I don't think it ends up that much different than calorie counting or measuring your foods and all of those things. But and then just those things like what's making me actually feel good. And then it sounds like in your practice, I mean, you're able to see it play out in real lives in multiple people's lives, that when you kind of get those basics under control, the other things start to fall into place, or at least become a lot easier to manage.
And it's always sort of to me about like, okay, so like that's my framework, but it doesn't have to be yours or the next person's, you know, like you get to pick what it is that makes you feel good today. And for some people, they've never even like slowed down to think like, what is it that makes me feel good today? Because all this time I've been thinking like I have to get to this magic number and I'll do anything I need to get there, you know? So, you know, whether it's journaling, whether it's like affirmations, like maybe it's going to therapy, like I don't care what it is, but like it is like a path of self-discovery to figure out what it is that empowers you, that makes you feel like that you are living sort of your values and that you are aligned.
Totally. So let's talk about the macros, because I think, you know, again, like earlier days when I've always been interested, it's like kind of a slippery slope to be interested in health and nutrition, because you can get like sort of rabbit holed and then like, well, if some is good, then lots is better. So there was definitely a point where I was super interested in macros, but kind of like anyone else, I don't really like diets just don't work. I don't think anyone, no matter what your goals are or what you're trying to
they have like
accomplish.
a 95% like fail rate.
Because they make no sense in real life. So, but there was a time when I was super interested in that. And so it was like, you know, they have all the apps for that and like put in your food and now you've got whatever. And I mean, I could never figure that out. And so I would just throw it away. Like, okay, well, apparently like I can only eat like, I don't even know, turkey for the rest of the day. I'm done. Like, I don't want to do that. So walk me through kind of how you, but I can see a value to it. At a macro level. So can you walk us through how you counsel like your patients on that?
So there's actually a dietitian out of, I think she's on the East Coast, but she read like an evidence-based article that came out, and they were looking at like all-cause mortality, chronic disease, all of those things, and they were like, who of like people who had cancer, heart disease, you know, like all the chronic conditions, what were they doing for the people who had less of this? And they were eating between 600 and 800 grams of fruits and vegetables a day. So she came up with sort of this 800 gram challenge where you eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables. There's some other things that count. But what does that look like in real life? Like 6 to 8 cups, right? And like none of us are eating 6 to 8 cups unless you're very intentional about that.
Right.
So that's sort of like her first pillar. And then the second one is focusing on protein, making sure you're getting enough protein.
Which traditionally, I would say lots of women in particular think they're getting more protein maybe than they are.
Yeah, and there's like different recommendations between like the RDA and the IOM and all that, but basically she uses those two pillars as sort of like your framework for quality in the diet, right? Because if I just told you like go eat this many calories, you could fill that up with whatever you wanted,
right?
And so I love that idea because it's not super like stringent. It's like adding things versus restricting them, and then
which I'm a huge fan of.
And then you see like what you have left over for like sort of this other category. So I used to sort of, you know, like do the macros on a very granular level. I find moms like it is really hard to like Tetris that stuff.
Right. Well, the end of the day is always stupid, right?
Yeah,
like you get to the end, you're like, I'm not eating that.
You get to the end of the day and you're like, well, I just ate dinner, but I need 30 more grams of protein, so I guess I'll eat this deli meat. No, like that was the moment that I was like, I can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so now I just focus more on like adequate protein, adequate fiber, and then like whatever else I made a big batch of ground turkey soup with like a bunch of vegetables this weekend, and I had Doritos like crunched on the side, because life is about balance. And if you're not going to enjoy it, then you're not going to do this plan for the rest of your life. And you want to find a way to eat that is sustainable for the rest of your life, not for 2 weeks. And
I
then
think
go off the handle.
That's a huge takeaway is it's like all these are great, but if they're not sustainable, they're kind of like all you've done is sort of tortured yourself for a couple of weeks. And most of us, it's anything you restrict. Yeah. That's going to be exactly what you're going for.
Yeah. I once heard a quote that was like, the amount that you restrict is equal to the amount that you like binge. Oh. And I was like, yeah, that's so, like think about everyone who like white knuckles it through the week and they're like, oh, I stayed on my plan. I did. And then what happens as soon as Friday night, Saturday and Sunday, like they just go off the grid. And then they are like, I can't figure out why I'm in this plateau. And it's like, well, you're not in a plateau. You took yourself out of it every single weekend. And so it's finding a way to enjoy the foods that you really love in a sustainable way. That's not like too far overboard, too far restricting. I think that's like the key is to like figure out what your like moderate approach looks like.
Mm-hmm. So you have done a lot of work with like binge eating or binge eating disorder. Yeah. So, and I always think, back traditionally, I think you say eating disorder, people think like anorexia, bulimia, but binge eating disorder is probably the most common, prevalent eating disorder like there is. I would think.
I don't know the statistics on it, but it definitely feels like it.
Well, because I almost think maybe not, I don't know that everyone will qualify for a diagnosis, but that eating pattern is so prevalent and
it's
really
like a
normalized.
Subclinical group of a lot of people, I would say, who like maybe don't qualify for the diagnosis, but like they have like some disordered eating patterns,
For sure. So can you actually talk to us about that and kind of your work with people in specifically binge eating patterns or binge eating disorder?
So, with the whole situation of like the binge eating is there's like so much going on, right? Like one, they might be totally under eating so that by the time the afternoon or night rolls around, like it's physiological, like their body is like getting those calories some way, somehow. So I always tell people like, first we have to get you like one, eating regular meals, and two, like getting you eating enough. Like there's a big difference in calories between plant volume and say like your processed refined foods volume. Like this is like this big, and your unrefined, whole fruits, vegetables, that sort of thing is like this big for your plate for the day, So it's a lot of food. But that's sort of always my first step is like, let's get you eating regularly, get you eating enough, get you eating quality ingredients. And then the struggle foods, so like the foods that they tend to like binge on, it is really about like exposing them to them, but like doing it in a way that is very mindful. So like walking them through like and engaging like all of the senses to be like, smell it, taste it, put it around in your mouth, and it's a different experience than the binge, because the binge is always like this very like frenzied, like rushed energy. Like I can't, like you are not even tasting the food,
Right.
It's like this quick hit of like dopamine that like sort of relieves whatever's going on.
Yep.
But if you never sort of address like the trigger that leads to the behavior or the thoughts that are happening, that's why the meditation is so helpful. That's why mindfulness is so helpful.
Yeah.
Then you're just going to spin your wheels forever. And so that's why I think like doing mindfulness, eating practices where you practice eating the foods that like you tend to overeat, or like any of us would overeat, because the food industry literally puts people in like functional brain MRI machines, and they make sure that your brain, like the pleasure centers, are lighting up when you're eating chips or whatever it is, you know? And so it's sort of like having that awareness, but going back to what you were talking about is like, but you have a choice in it. And it's like, sometimes I'll have the thing because I want it and it's worth it to me at that time. But there's other times where it's like, well, I'm going to pass on that because I know it's just going to leave me like feeling like more cravey, or like I just don't want to like feel that way today. Like I want to keep my energy like more in balance, whatever, and there's nothing that's right or wrong about it. It's just like finding your middle ground.
And so you had talked a little bit about something we've talked about again too, is like structure. So do you kind of tell people to have like structured times in their day, plus minus, that they eat? So, some people, I know lots of adults and younger people are like, I'm not a breakfast person. I mean, how do you walk them through that kind of situation?
I'm not a huge fan of intermittent fasting, but I think it's just because of like my own background, my own personal, struggles with like that sort of thing. So, and the whole thing with like intermittent fasting or skipping a meal is like you're just cutting the calories. Like It's just another way to do it. And so people can still like gain weight intermittent fasting or whatever if they're not in a calorie deficit. But I think a lot about how those decisions, like skipping something, affects them either later in the day or the next day. So like maybe they had like a crazy weekend where there's lots of like drinks or, appetizers, whatever it was. And then by the time Monday rolls around, they're like, oh, I'm not as hungry. Well, are you not as hungry because you consumed a lot of calories this weekend? And so your body's just sort of, catching up to that? Or are you really not hungry? And so it's sort of a giant experimentation that they have to do or walk themselves through, where they see like, when I skip a meal, am I eating more like later into the night or that sort of thing, and really sort of like coming to terms or like developing awareness around that. Because if there's not, then they just like continue to skip meals. I'm a big believer in like 3 balanced meals because I don't like the feeling of getting like super hungry if I do skip a meal. But yeah, that's one place that I like to start.
I think that was a good point too, because I think, especially initially as you're trying to kind of like get into good habits and prevent sort of maybe more of binging and restricting, I think that's an awesome, just stick with these structured times for eating. But I think, like you said, if you get a situation where, which I think we've all been there, like after party weekend, whatever, you had lots of exciting things going on, you ate and drank and whatever. Monday morning, maybe you legit aren't hungry, and that's actually mindful because you're just listening to your body, which is like, we're cool. We have plenty here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, maybe take a knee and wait till you're hungry. But I think it's noticing that. Are you doing that because you're like, oh my God, I ate so much this weekend, I'm going to skip breakfast so I can cut some calories? Or is it because you're like, wow, I just really don't want to eat anything right now. I'm good.
Exactly.
And so maybe grab a little something in case you don't make it till lunch.
Yes.
But
like there was a girl a couple weeks ago who was like, well, I had to get out the door, kids busy, whatever, and I didn't have breakfast, and I got to work and they had all the Halloween candy, right?
Yeah.
So she was like dug in because she was like ravenous by the time that she actually got to work. And it's like, okay, so what are things that like you could plan around this for the next time? So like if breakfast like didn't happen and you're walking into work and that situation's going to be there, then like what can you just like keep at work to have on hand for the crazy mornings where everyone wakes up late and you're like, got to get out the door.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, speaking of breakfasts and mornings, I love mornings, actually. So, and maybe I think part of that is being the mom. And for a lot of us, that is the time that if mom wakes up, other people sleep.
Exactly.
And so I think I've always been a fan of mornings. So can you're kind of a proponent of the morning routine. Is that correct?
Yeah, because like by the time like 5 p.m. rolls around, like I'm tired. I don't really want to work out. Like, so if those things are going to happen, but I've actually tried to like lessen or like loosen like the rigidness of like, oh, well, it has to get done in the morning.
Yeah.
I heard something really good the other day that was like, be very like rigid with your goal, but be flexible with how you get there.
Ooh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So my ideal morning is like wake up, have my coffee, work out, do some journaling maybe, and then like I'm in and meditation. and then I'm in like a pretty good headspace. But like sometimes that does not happen for whatever reason, right?
Totally.
So on those days, instead of like beating myself up, because that's like another big thing, is like getting out of the beating yourself up and doing more nurturing to yourself. But on those days, it's like, okay, well, what else could I do? And it's like, could I get out for like a 20-minute walk over lunch? And the answer is usually yes. And so, you know, it's like finding those little pockets. And, you know, maybe it's not the full-blown morning routine, but you find little things that make you feel good. And then like that always like propels you to sort of like feel good and be in your body in the way that you want to be.
Yes. Well, because I always feel like the morning routine is another thing. I think even looking in my life, like you can see sort of your evolution as a person, or maybe just getting old. I don't really know. But I think that it goes back to like, I was always like, okay, I'm going to get up. This is my time. And I think like you said, I was like very like rigid about like, I have to do this workout. And then, you know, I have to drink my coffee.
Yeah.
And then I have to do my journaling because that's what good people do. And then that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like all these things so I could be like so great. And then if you didn't do them, you're like, oh, I'm such a failure. And
then
so,
you throw in the towel for the rest of the week.
Right. Because you're like, well, this week's shot, maybe next week
Exactly.
I'll wake up and be perfect again.
Exactly.
So so then like you said, kind of as I've gotten older, it's like, oh, maybe I should just figure out like, what actually makes me feel good. And it's not that, I mean, coffee and working out, and that all makes me feel good, but not when it's because I'm like,
right,
you know, torturing myself, telling myself this is how we will make it through the day. So, you know, I've gotten more into like, well, actually, maybe I'll just have my coffee and enjoy it instead of chugging it down so I can stay awake all day. Maybe I'll just stretch because actually that's not hard and it's easy to do when you're still sleepy in the morning, and then you actually feel good and it's beneficial. You know, all these things, you know, write out, what am I going to do today? Those kind of things. And then you're like, oh, it turned out my whole day was better because of that, not because I forced myself to get up when I was exhausted and do all the things I thought I had to do.
I started a morning ritual and then an afternoon ritual.
Ooh. What's that?
So the morning ritual is like sort of like work stuff that like needs to get done. So like, you know, getting back to patients. But there's always like this is like a firm boundary, is like there's always meditation. There's always affirmations. There is always, what else is in there? There's just like a couple things I have to like check no matter what in the mornings. And then the afternoon, I mean, this only applies if you're in healthcare, but like I will actually look at all my patients for the next day and I'll go over all their labs and everything, because it just sets my day up to be so much better. I'm not running in there being like, who is what?
Yeah. That's huge.
And so finding like sort of a wind down routine and then, you know, like a starting your day routine, I think is very helpful.
Well, and I think that there's such like comfort and consistency in the routine. And, you know, I think that other thing, like you said, was to be rigid about the goals, but looser about how you're getting there. But I think the thing to keep in mind is, I mean, you can be less rigid with your day to day, but if you feel yourself like these are the things that are still moving me towards the goal, like just moving forward, that's a pace, really. So
Katie Milkman is a PhD sort of researcher on behavior change, and she talks a lot about a study they did where they had two groups, and the first group was told, I believe, like they needed to work out 7 days a week no matter what. And the second group, they got the same instructions, but they said you have two sort of like get out of jail cards where like if it happens, it's not a big deal and you still get the points. Well, who do you think like had a more sustainable approach?
I'm going to guess the get out of jail people.
Correct. And so I tell my patients that all the time is like, you know, aim for whatever the goal is, but give yourself a couple of outs because life isn't perfect and like it's going to hand you some lemons on some days. And so, you know, working on not like beating yourself up or throwing in the towel for the rest of the week just because you had this like one bad thing happen, you know, I think is so important.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that's just even it, like where you start to realize like some days where you're like, actually, my day will go a lot better if I get 30 minutes, 45 minutes more sleep and like not beating yourself up for that. Actually giving yourself credit to be like, wow, that was very insightful. You took good care of yourself today and your day went a lot better than if you woke up and forced yourself to, you know, work out and do all the things and then your whole day was just you.
Yeah, and also
zoned
like
out.
and also like celebrating, like none of us do this, but like it is so important to like sit down or like put time aside to like celebrate like the things that you did like keep your word on, you know?
Totally.
Like I just hit the mark of being or like having my own practice for a year. And like normally I would have just like been like, oh yeah, it was a thing that happened, but I got to keep going. And I was like, no, we're going to like have a nice dinner. We're going to like make a big deal about this because we have to like pause and have gratitude for how far we've come, or we're just on like the endless treadmill of like
totally
doing more, being more.
Well, and I don't know too. I mean, that this might just be a human characteristic or maybe kind of a mom thing. But I think sort of that, I mean, we don't stop and celebrate a lot of things. It's like, if I did it, it really wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
You know, I think we downplay it and it's like, you know, meanwhile, our kid's turning 4 and we act like they won the Nobel Prize. Like we should get balloons and cake and everybody. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. We should. I'm all about celebrate the things. But you work hard at something for a year plus and like are moving towards your goals and actually like putting work into it. Yeah. This guy just stayed alive for 4 years. You know what I mean? Exactly. And we're just like, you know, just keep on the treadmill. And so I love that idea too, is it's like, sometimes I think in a lot of things you have to almost remind yourself to treat yourself like you would treat your kid.
Yeah, it's like
you want to celebrate.
Nurture yourself as you nurture your children.
And I think talk about that, if you don't mind a little too, is what effect do you think? Because I've always said, you know, taking care of yourself as a parent feels selfish sometimes, but I think that the trickle down of that is actually creating a much healthier environment for your kids. So have you had some experience with that too?
Yeah. You know, it's always sort of like, oh, well, I feel like bad if I go out or do this, or if I go for an hour run or whatever it is. But I can guarantee you every time I do those things, I come back and I'm like refreshed and I'm like ready to pour into everyone. I mean, it's like very cliche of like pour into your own cup so you can pour into everyone else's, but like it's true. And if you don't take care of yourself, I think that's where the burnout comes in. It's like you're just constantly taking care of it, and like you deserve to be nurtured and be taken care of just like those little human beings do.
Totally. And you would totally do all those things for your kids.
100%.
And that's what I also love about your approach to eating, because I think that we're big proponents of the family meal and all being able to eat together. And I do think that, you know, kids seeing parents on diets at a very early age starts to really change the way that they look at look at food and they look at themselves. But the thing, you know, ideas of like we should eat more fruits and vegetables, you know, we should eat healthy proteins. Those are like universal. Yeah. So it's very easy to make, you know, turkey vegetable soup and say this is a very appropriate meal for all of us. Yeah. Mom's not on a diet. You know, I'm not trying to get myself skinny or I don't hate myself. This is just good for us all. Yeah. And I think when you can get to a place like that, it's not only sustainable, but it's like so much healthier mindset for you and your kids.
And I tell them, because, you know, there's so much talk around like good and bad foods and nothing's good or bad and blah, blah, blah. But I heard something really good a couple weeks ago, and that was like there's sometimes foods and there's always foods. Yeah. And so my kids, you know, are like knee deep in their Halloween candy, and like every night it's like this battle of how many pieces they can have. So I actually started turning it back on them, and I was like, well, how many do you think is like a reasonable amount? Because this is a sometimes food, like, you know, and I kind of try to teach them a little bit about it. But they usually pick like 2 pieces, and I'm like, okay, reasonable. Right. Go have your 2 pieces, you know. But, you know, another sort of like trick that I mean, my kids are kind of picky eaters, so I'm like not the one to be bragging about this by any means.
But how old are your kids?
We got 6, 4, and 18 months.
So, I mean, you're kind of in that age where that's pretty common.
But like one way I try to sort of, you know, make sure that their plate's like somewhat healthy is like I make them like pick a fruit or a vegetable at every meal. And it's like not in like a neurotic, like, you know, obsessive way, but it's like these are foods that are going to make your tummy feel good. And you want your tummy, you know. And then like, I mean, sometimes I'll talk to them about the gut-brain connection, but it's probably too much. But
well, you know, they learn. I think they take in more of that than we realize. Yeah. I have a really crazy, so Halloween this year. Yeah. So my kids are a little older. So they're 13, almost 11, almost 9, almost 7. well, all of our birthdays are like November, December for my kids. So everybody's like at the cusp.
Yeah.
So I would say kind of like you said, so there's all this like how you talk about junk foods, or that's even a naughty word. You know, if you get really into it, it gets very sticky. And definitely like through the years, I feel like I had a lot more anxiety about like this Halloween candy, which I mean, we used to get, I don't know, I think I kept it under my bed in a pillowcase full of candy and went to town. But I don't know why. You know, I think it's just being in it. So when they were littler, I had a lot more anxiety, and it would be like, you know, everybody would ask, can we please have one? And you're like, maybe one, you know, all along. And so this year, I kind of just made like a little bit more of a conscious choice. I think I loosened up on it over the years anyway. But this year, I was just like, I'm just going to not really intervene. Yeah. And like, on Halloween night, they still, you know, can I eat this? Can I do this? I'm like, do what you want. Do what you want. Yeah. So they're eating their little candies. And we were just chatting, and my oldest is 13, and he was kind of like, they sort them because that's a process. Of course, you have to organize it. And then he says to his brothers, do you guys want my candy? Like, I'm not going to eat all this. And I thought, what? Like, I would never have given my candy to my brother, but I was just like, you know, I'm just still like observing.
The less like pressure you put on around it. Like, I see it all the time, especially in like in houses where like the parents are like, oh, well, we don't buy any of that stuff. Like and then I see those kids like then when they do get around it, it's like they just go bananas.
Totally.
And so like I honestly try to keep like stuff in our house that's just like, you know, the sometimes foods, because I'm like, I want them to have a relationship around it where it's not, you know, super restricted or super, you know, that's all we eat. So yeah, it's for sure like a slippery sort of thing to navigate, but hopefully we're doing okay.
Yeah, totally. So my son was gonna give it all to his siblings, and I was shocked. But for some reason, I just brought up, I was like, did you know that the dentist actually buys back candy? Yeah. But I was like, but it's like $1 a pound up to 5 pounds. And I was like, I don't think $5 is enough for all of you. You know, thinking again to me, I would be like, there'd be no way I would have sold my candy for $5. But my kids they ended up, long story short, they end up, all of them, sold all their Halloween candy to their grandpa.
To their grandpa, I love
They were like, well, I'll give it to grandpa for $1. And I just watched, they sold all their Halloween candy. Part of it, and I'm not trying to pretend, like, I think part of it stems from years back, because there was a couple comments, because mom won't let us eat this probably anyway, and I was like, still no comment, and I was like, that's on me. Yeah. But I was just thought it was very interesting, because I think as parents, our anxiety is that, you know, if I don't control this, it's going to be a free-for-all, and I don't know what we think is exactly going to happen, that all of our kids, Halloween is going to give all our kids diabetes or something. But you know, it was all my anxiety. And so I think just granted that went way crazier than I thought it was, but I'm like, I'm just going to intentionally observe, like, what is their behavior? Yeah. And turns out, like, it's me who really cared about the candy. They just wanted to go through the process. Yeah. And because it isn't something that doesn't exist in their life, they didn't feel like they had to hoard it. Right. But I was shocked. So I thought that was just all four of them. I thought at least there'd be one that was like, you all are crazy. Yeah. Like, so they ended up, it was like a non-thing.
That is so funny.
So I don't know that will work on everyone, but I will say that, like, I found it very interesting to see if I had intervened, they probably would have felt more of a need to
keep it,
hoard it and win, you know? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So the one of the other things I did want to talk about was exercise for mental health. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about sort of your approach with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think exercise, for me personally, no matter, like, and I think the other important thing to think about in exercise is I have so many patients who are like, well, I don't feel like doing it. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like doing it 95% of the time, but I know that sort of the action then begets the motivation, and then it circles, versus motivation then action. So for me, it's just sort of like this non-negotiable thing that makes me feel good. And so I sort of mix it up between running, spinning, and then I do some strength training too. But I think like it's all important. And there's another PhD, Kelly McGonigal, who has a book called The Joy of Movement. And she really talks about like finding movement that you actually enjoy. If you hate, you know, the exercise you're currently doing, like find something that you actually enjoy, because the movement, like it helps with our energy. It helps move it, and it helps us show up like refreshed and ready to go. I mean, there's so much good research, but from, you know, it clears your mind to it helps with anxiety, depression, all of that. I just think it's a really great tool that is often underutilized for mood.
I totally agree. And I think, like you said, taking the approach where looking at something that you actually enjoy, or at least don't hate, start there, because I think it will grow as it becomes more of a habit for you, and you kind of get into it, and it doesn't seem like such a chore. But I think you're right. There's a lot of people, we torture ourselves. I ate this and now I have to run it off, or I have to do all these things. Well, that's not the attitude to take. And I think the other thing, especially for women, the strength training piece, I think is huge. I was late to that party. No, no, but I, like in my 30s, I think my husband, we actually had Bill Esch on here. He's like a kettlebell champion. He used to own a gym, and my husband was friends with him, and we went to his gym, and it was all like weights and like free weights, and it was just totally out of my comfort zone, because I feel like when I would
we grew up in like cardio nation.
Totally. It's
aerobics.
Just run, maybe the elliptical, you know, I could do the machines, but it was like, you want me to lift up, like I'm gonna hurt myself, or I'm certainly gonna at least look super stupid because I have no idea what I'm doing. But once I kind of like was like, all right, I'm just gonna bite the bullet and give this a try. I mean, it's probably one of the healthiest things you can do, just for your bones. And I think, like you said, like we all thought we just have to do cardio, whereas like building that muscle, it not only is, you know, good for helping you, you know, with your weight and how you want to look, but turns out, like, I mean, I think in the long term, just that strength training is so good for you. And I actually think it's a huge mental, like, confidence booster too, when you don't feel, not like I'm, you know, like whatever, a power lifter or anything, but when you feel stronger, I think that says something.
I once read, like, you don't know how much you can like lift when you show up that day. And so you go and you're like, oh, I did that. And then it just like, it's another one of those like sort of Tumblr effects. It's like, well, now that's becoming easy and I can do, and like that directly correlates to like you feeling empowered throughout your day. Because there's things out there where you are sitting here wondering, like, can I do X, Y, Z? And yes, you can. And this is like one tool, or like one sort of way that, you know, you are building that trust with yourself and you're building that confidence.
I love it. Well, this has been incredible.
So fun.
I think I'm going to move on to our next segment. So I have Ask Me Anything, which is really kind of ask you anything too.
That sounds fun.
So we have some questions.
Ask me anything.
I'm going to. So this one is from Alyssa. It says, I have tried to meditate so many times and I just can't seem to stick with it or really find the benefit. Are there alternatives to traditional meditation that can reap similar benefits?
So I think, you know, like meditation, mindfulness, all of that stuff gets thrown around so much right now. And I think what like no one else, or like no one is really talking about, is like when you first start to meditate, it's like all the chatter. Like you are like, oh my God, I have so many thoughts. And you like never even knew that was happening. And then the second like sort of layer becomes like that, just like the lists that pop in your head. And, you know, it's like this never ending like thought loop. And I think people quit at those like stages. But I think if you can get deeper, if you can really like get embodied. So like we aren't just meditating to meditate. Like imagine yourself like in your body while you're doing this and stick with it, because eventually you get to like sort of that inner wisdom, like that inner guide, that inner like knowing of where you take up space, of like what's true for you. And so I've been where she's been, where it's like, well, I just like this is not working, but I would encourage her to keep with a daily practice. I really like Insight Timer is a free app, and they have thousands of meditations. So if she needs guided, if she needs visualization, like there's so many different kinds of meditation as well. So I'd also just encourage you to like experiment with it and see like which ones you like, which ones you don't like. And then, you know, I like to tell people, start with 10 minutes a day, start with 5 minutes a day, start with where you will do it. But also like increase that, because the longer, sort of like deeper you go into that, like the more like delta brainwaves, like you get into that deep state of relaxation where it just becomes that inner knowing versus all the thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, again, like I think thinking of previous versions of myself where, you know, I was like, well, meditation is good for you, I'm going to do it. I totally relate to this, where it was like, okay, well, all I did was sit here and like think about stuff, and then at the end I'm like, oh, I'm bad at this, so now I feel bad about this, and so you don't stick with it. And I wasn't really like, I don't really see how this is helping me. I think all I did was worry about all the things I had to do today. And I know you know you're supposed to recognize that and move it away, and that would last like a third of a second, something else. But and I don't know if this is helpful, and I never really have. I don't know if there's a hard line between meditation and mindfulness, or I mean, I think those kind of overlap, but I was kind of like, I just don't think that's for me. And I have a therapist I see, and he said, you know, just do nothing. Just sit for 20 minutes and do nothing. And you were like, and that was my assignment, which of course,
gouge my eyes out.
Right. I was like, he's like, how does that sound? I was like, that sounds frightening. Like,
yeah.
But I was like, all right, fine. And that to me was actually, during that process, that was the best thing I could have done. And I was like, wait a minute, is mindfulness just noticing things? And he was like, yay, good job. I was like, because I just sat like outside, and I was like, I didn't even know that was in my backyard. Like I just looked around and was like, I'm just going to watch the birds. Like birds are crazy, by the way. Like how do they know? How do they all fly together like that? Yeah. I was like, that is amazing.
Do all these things.
I know. So it sounds ridiculous, but I was like, I think this is it. And the scariest part is when you realize how much you're not in that mode.
Oh, yeah.
The rest of your day.
Yeah.
And so to me, I don't know if this helps people, but for me, it was like, if you're struggling with like this effort to be mindful and to meditate and do all these things, try doing nothing and just noticing things. I was like, I can do that. And now it's not like I go through my whole day, you know, noticing the dew on the grass and all of these things. But what I have been able to hone is that skill to click that on. Like I can be like, oh, I'm going to just notice dinner. I'm just going to notice, and maybe it won't sustain for that. But I now I intentionally can have those moments through the day. And once I realized how that wasn't how I was operating 99.9% of the time, I started to realize like, oh, this really does have a ton of value.
Yeah. And I think also like wash the dishes to wash the dishes. Like don't wash them to get to the next task. Like brush your teeth to brush your teeth. And one last thing I would add here is like if she really feels like she's struggling, I would certainly consider seeking out like a meditation like teacher or someone who's like been trained in it just to help her get off the ground, because meditation is really like a very like deep embodied inquiry about where you feel what and what it's telling you. And if you don't sort of like have that guide, I think it can be difficult to get into it.
I can see that. And I think the other thing is, I think at first when you're struggling, and again, I'm no like expert by any means, but I think it's easy to feel like it's a waste of time until you start to recognize those moments and you go, oh, these are like the only times really.
Yeah.
Like they're the only times I'm awake for, right?
Yeah.
So I would say it's worth finding what works for you, but recognizing that this is normal and maybe you're just haven't found your mode.
Yeah.
So don't keep beating your head, telling yourself you have to do something that's not working for you. Seek something else out where you start to get that feeling and that state of mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, this one. All right, so this is from Kelly. I am a busy mom, and feeding myself in the morning is hard when I'm trying to get kids and myself out the door. What is your go-to breakfast?
Okay, so we are transitioning to fall and winter right now.
Ooh, yes, we are.
So I've been making an oatmeal bake with pears and apples. That's like really good. And then I put like a dollop of Greek yogurt, vanilla on top. And it's basically like apple crisp and kind of ice cream, but not. So
do you bake that like that morning, or do you?
I've been making it on the weekends, and then like I have it all week to eat.
Just warm it up.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's what I love in the fall and winter, because I also care about eating, one, in season because it tastes better, and two, I like to be warm, as we covered earlier. So in the summer, I might do more like smoothies, or I'll do I also love a good breakfast quesadilla.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But yeah, anything that's quick and easy. And on the days that, like, you know, everything else has gotten to you and you don't have the oatmeal bake, like, grab a protein bar and a apple, or like, get your protein, get your fruits and veggies.
Totally. Yeah, I would say I'm much more of I do like sweets, but I'm much more of like a savory person. So that's where, like, sometimes with the breakfasts, the easy breakfasts are usually sweet, like prepackaged easy breakfasts. So I think I actually posted this on my Instagram, but my like big go-to is like on Sunday to do like a sheet pan of roasted vegetables, which makes me feel like I'm really doing something. It's so easy. Like you just cut it and like throw it in there and like, so it just roast all these vegetables, and then I put them in little containers, and that's not that hard. And then to just do like, I just warm that up and do like over easy eggs.
Oh yeah, so good.
It takes like really no time.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel like I'm getting fancy brunch. I'm like, this should be on a menu.
Yeah.
But
I love it. I love breakfast, and so, you know, like, that sounds delicious. Costco has these like delicious chicken sausages in their frozen section, so I will make those sometimes with eggs and then throw them in like breakfast quesadilla with
quesadillas are big
with like a bowl of fruit. So
for
good.
Like that one, my kids are not as excited about my bowl of vegetables with eggs in the morning, you know, but occasionally, but not like I am. But I will say the quesadilla is the hands down award winner. And like, you can stick stuff from dinner,
anything,
chicken, steak, beef, whatever, I'll stick that in there, and that one even my 13-year-old will eat.
I also tell people don't sleep on beans, so like black beans, pinto beans, like,
oh yeah,
throw them in,
just stuff it in. So I like it. Well, thank you, Molly. This has been super fun.
Yeah, it was so fun.
I love it. And thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Feeding the Family. We hope that you'll hit that subscribe button wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, and join us again next week for another great episode.